The captive. Arthur's fingers danced across the spines of dusty tomes, their faded gold lettering catching the afternoon light that streamed through the bookshop's grimy windows. He inhaled deeply, savoring the musty scent of aged paper and leather bindings. It was a quiet Tuesday, like most days at Bartholomew's Books, and Arthur found himself lost in thought as he reorganized the classics section. Keats next to Shelley, a travesty, he muttered, swapping their positions on the shelf. Much better. The shop bell jangled, startling Arthur from his reverie. He turned, plastering on his best customer service smile, only to find the store empty. Frowning, he made his way to the front, peering out onto the deserted street. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" A faint shimmer in the air caught his eye, like heat rising from sun-baked asphalt. Arthur blinked, rubbing his eyes. When he looked again, the distortion had vanished. "Great," he sighed. "Now I'm seeing things. Maybe I should lay off the late-night sci-fi marathons." He turned back to the shop, only to collide with something solid and invisible. Arthur stumbled backward, his heart racing. Before he could finish his thought, a blinding light engulfed him. Arthur felt weightless, his feet leaving the ground. Panic seized him as the bookshop disappeared, replaced by a sterile metallic corridor. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," he chanted, his voice echoing in the unfamiliar space. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." A door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a figure that made Arthur's jaw drop. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, with skin that seemed to glow with an otherworldly iridescence. Her features were undeniably human-like, but refined to the point of perfection. Long, silvery hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, a swirling mix of violet and gold, fixed on Arthur with an intensity that made him want to shrink into nothingness. "Fascinating," the alien woman purred, her voice like liquid velvet. "You're much more reactive than the others." Arthur's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. "Others? What others? Who are you? Where am I?" The woman circled him, her movements graceful and predatory. So many questions, how quaint. She reached out, running a finger along Arthur's jawline. He flinched at her touch, earning a raised eyebrow from his captor. "My name is Nua," she said, as if bestowing a great honor upon him. "And you, little human, are my new pet." Arthur's eyes widened. "Pet? Listen, lady, I don't know what kind of kinky roleplay you're into, but I'm not." Nua's laughter cut him off, a sound like tinkling crystal. "Oh, you are delightful. Much more entertaining than the Aryan primate or the Gazrasian slime beast I was considering." Aryan, Gazrasian. Arthur's head spun. This isn't real. I'm dreaming or hallucinating. Maybe old man Bartholomew finally snapped and slipped something into my coffee. Nua's amusement faded, replaced by a look of mild irritation. "Your denial is becoming tedious. Perhaps a demonstration is in order." She snapped her fingers, and suddenly, they were no longer in the corridor. Arthur found himself in a vast domed room, one wall entirely transparent, offering a view that made his knees weak. Stars, endless stars, stretched out into the inky blackness of space, and there, a blue and green marble suspended in the void, growing smaller by the second. "Earth," Arthur whispered, his voice breaking. That's Earth." Nua nodded, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "Indeed, your quaint little mud ball of a planet. Quite unremarkable, really, but it does produce some intriguing specimens." Arthur tore his gaze away from the rapidly shrinking Earth, forcing himself to focus on Nua. "Why me? Why did you take me?" She shrugged, the gesture somehow both elegant and dismissive. "Boredom, mostly. The vastness of space loses its charm after a few millennia. I needed a diversion." "A diversion?" Arthur repeated, his shock giving way to indignation. "I'm not some toy for you to play with when you're bored." Nua's eyes flashed dangerously. "Oh, but you are. You're whatever I want you to be, little human. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. Arthur opened his mouth to argue further, but Nuo raised a hand, silencing him. Enough. You must be tired after your journey. I'll show you to your quarters. She led him through a series of winding corridors, each more opulent than the last. Arthur couldn't help but marvel at the advanced technology surrounding him, even as dread churned in his stomach. They stopped before a door that slid open at Nua's approach. Arthur's eyes widened as he took in the room beyond. It was spacious and luxurious, with a large circular bed dominating the center. One wall was entirely transparent, offering a breathtaking view of the stars. "This is where you'll sleep," Nua said, gesturing for Arthur to enter. He stepped inside cautiously, half expecting some kind of trap. "It's nice," he admitted grudgingly. "But I'm not a pet. I won't be kept in a gilded cage." Nua's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Oh, Arthur, you have no idea what you are yet. But you will." She turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Rest now. Tomorrow your training begins." The door slid shut behind her, leaving Arthur alone with his thoughts and the vastness of space. He sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. What the hell have I gotten myself into? Life aboard the ship days blurred together as Arthur adjusted to life aboard Nua's ship. Each morning, she would appear in his room, starting him awake with her presence. "Rise and shine, my little pet," she'd say, her voice lilting with amusement. "We have much to do today." Arthur quickly learned that resisting was futile. Nua possessed strength and abilities far beyond human limitations. When he tried to escape on the third day, she simply teleported in front of him, her expression a mix of annoyance and amusement. "Really, Arthur," she said, clicking her tongue. "And here I thought we were making progress." As the days passed, Arthur found himself drawn into Nua's world, despite his best efforts to maintain emotional distance. She was fascinating, her knowledge of the universe vast, and her technology mind-boggling. One day, as they sat in what Nua called the observation deck, a room with walls that could become transparent, offering 360 degrees views of space, Arthur couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "How old are you?" he asked, watching a distant nebula swirl in vibrant hues of purple and blue. Nua tilted her head, considering. "In Earth years, approximately 3,427. Arthur choked on air. 3,000, but you look gorgeous, youthful, the pinnacle of evolution," Nua supplied, her eyes twinkling. "I was going to say, not a day over 25, Arthur muttered. Nua laughed, the sound sending an involuntary shiver down Arthur's spine. "Flattery will get you everywhere, my pet." As the days turned into weeks, Arthur found himself engaging in increasingly complex conversations with Nua. They debated philosophy, discussed the nature of consciousness, and compared the artistic achievements of their respective cultures. "I still can't believe you've never read Shakespeare," Arthur said one evening as they lounged in Nua's personal quarters. He'd long since given up on maintaining formal boundaries with his captor. Nua reclined on a chaise lounge, idly twirling a strand of her silvery hair. "Why would I bother with the scribblings of a primitive species?" Arthur bristled at her dismissive tone. "Shakespeare's works are timeless. They explore the depths of human emotion and experience in ways that resonate across cultures." "Prove it," Nua challenged, her eyes sparkling with interest. "Recite something for me." Arthur cleared his throat, suddenly nervous under her intense gaze. He chose a passage from Hamlet, his voice growing stronger as he lost himself in the familiar words. "What a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god." As he finished, he noticed Nua watching him with an odd expression. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," she said softly. I've never seen you so passionate before. It's intriguing." Arthur felt a blush creep up his neck. "Yeah, well, Shakespeare has that effect on people." Nua stood, moving closer to him with her usual feline grace. People, yes, but I'm not people, am I, Arthur? Her proximity sent Arthur's heart racing. He could smell her alien perfume, like nothing on earth, spicy and sweet and utterly intoxicating. No, he managed to say, his mouth suddenly dry. You're definitely not people. Nua's hand cupped his cheek, her touch sending electricity through his body. You're a curious creature, Arthur. So fragile and yet. Her thumb traced his lower lip. So resilient. Arthur knew he should pull away. This was Stockholm Syndrome, plain and simple. And yet he found himself leaning into her touch, his resolve crumbling. Why me, Nua? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why did you choose me? Nua's gaze softened, her usual arrogance replaced with something almost vulnerable. I don't know, she admitted, but I'm glad I did. Before Arthur could respond, she pressed her lips to his, claiming him with a possessiveness that left no doubt. He was hers, for better or worse. The test Arthur's relationship with Nua grew more complicated as time passed. He was no longer just her pet. He was something more, but he couldn't quite define what. Their nights were filled with whispered conversations, stolen glances, and the occasional passionate embrace. Arthur found himself wanting to please her, to earn her approval. It was a dangerous game, and he knew it. One day, Nua brought Arthur to a part of the ship he had never seen before. The walls were stark white, and the air hummed with energy. What is this place? He asked, a sense of unease settling in his gut. This, Nua said, her tone uncharacteristically serious, is where I test my creations. Arthur's blood ran cold. Creations. Nua nodded, her expression unreadable. I've lived for thousands of years, Arthur. Do you think I've spent all that time idly floating through space? Arthur's heart pounded in his chest. What kind of tests? Don't be afraid, Nua said, though her words did little to calm him. This is a test of loyalty. I need to know that you are truly mine. Arthur's mind raced. What do you mean? Haven't I proven myself to you already? Nua's gaze hardened. Actions speak louder than words, Arthur. I need to see if you'll obey me, even when it goes against your nature. Arthur swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? Nua gestured, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a small chamber. Inside, a creature cowered in the corner. It was humanoid, but clearly not human, its skin a sickly green, its eyes wide and terrified. This is a Clivian, Nua said. A rather primitive species, but they have their uses. I want you to kill it. Arthur's heart dropped. Kill it? But it's defenseless. Nua's expression remained cold. Yes, and I want you to end its life. Arthur took a step back, shaking his head. I can't do that, Nua. I'm not a murderer. Nua's eyes flashed with anger. You will do as I command, Arthur, or I will find someone who will. Arthur's mind raced. He was trapped, with no way out, but he couldn't bring himself to kill the creature, no matter how much Nua demanded it. I won't do it, he said, his voice trembling. I can't. Nua's face twisted in fury. You dare defy me? Arthur stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run. I'm not a killer, Nua. I won't become one for you. For a moment, he thought she might strike him down where he stood, but then something shifted in her expression. The anger faded, replaced by a look of regret. Very well, she said quietly. You pass the test. Arthur blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. What? Nua waved her hand, and the creature disappeared, leaving the chamber empty. It was a test, Arthur, a test of your humanity, and you passed. Arthur felt like his legs might give out. I don't understand. Nua stepped closer, her gaze softening. I needed to know if you were still you, even after everything we've been through. And you are. That's why I chose you, Arthur, because you're different. Arthur's mind swam with conflicting emotions. Relief, confusion, anger, all jumbled together in a chaotic mess. "But why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why put me through this?" Nua sighed, her expression weary. "Because I wanted to be sure that I hadn't broken you, that you were still the person I admired." Arthur stared at her, searching her eyes for answers. "And what now? What happens now?" Nua's gaze held his, a strange vulnerability in her eyes. "Now we move forward, together." Arthur wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew one thing: his life would never be the same again, and neither, it seemed, would Nua's. The breakthrough time passed, and Arthur began to understand Nua in ways he hadn't before. She was ancient, yes, but also lonely in a way that transcended words. Her arrogance and cruelty were masks, hiding a deep-seated fear of isolation. Arthur found himself drawn to her, despite everything. She was a puzzle, and he couldn't help but try to piece her together. One day, as they sat in the observation deck, watching a distant galaxy spin lazily in the void, Nua broke the silence. "Arthur," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "do you ever wish to return to Earth?" The question took him by surprise. I don't know," he admitted. "I miss it, of course, but things are different now. I've changed." Nua nodded, her gaze distant. "I've been thinking about it, about letting you go." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. "Letting me go? Why?" Nua sighed, looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "Because it's the right thing to do. You don't belong here, Arthur. You belong with your own kind." Arthur felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving her, but he also knew she was right. "What about you?" he asked softly. "What will you do?" Nua shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Continue as I always have, I suppose. Drifting through the stars, searching for something I can never quite grasp." Arthur reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to be alone, Nua. There are others out there. People who could understand you, who could help you." Nua squeezed his hand, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe one day." They sat in silence for a long time, just holding each other's hands and watching the stars. The day of Arthur's departure arrived all too soon. Nua had arranged for a small shuttle to take him back to Earth, where he would be dropped off in a secluded area, far from prying eyes. Arthur stood in the hangar bay, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He wanted to stay with Nua, to continue unraveling the mystery that was her. But he also knew that Earth was where he belonged. "Are you ready?" Nua asked, her voice tinged with sadness. Arthur nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. "I guess so." Nua stepped closer, reaching up to cup his cheek. "I'll miss you, Arthur." "I'll miss you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you know." Nua leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. It was a goodbye, and they both knew it. "Take care of yourself," she whispered as she pulled away. "You too," Arthur replied, his throat tight. With one last lingering glance, he turned and walked up the ramp to the shuttle. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, sealing him inside. As the shuttle lifted off, Arthur pressed his hand to the window, watching as Nua grew smaller and smaller until she was just a dot in the vastness of space. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: his time with Nua had changed him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Homecoming. Arthur's return to Earth was surreal. The shuttle dropped him off in a remote forest, where he spent hours wandering before stumbling upon a small town. His re-entry into society was disorienting. Everything felt too loud, too bright, too overwhelming. People asked questions he couldn't answer, and he found himself longing for the quiet solitude of Nua's ship. But as time passed, Arthur began to adjust. He reconnected with old friends, found a job at a local library, and slowly rebuilt his life. Yet, even as he settled back into the routine of Earth, a part of him remained in the stars with Nua. He dreamed of her often, of the way her eyes sparkled when she was amused, of the softness in her voice when she spoke to him in the quiet hours of the night. Arthur knew he would never forget her, even as he moved on. She had left an indelible mark on his soul, one that would stay with him for the rest of his days. A new beginning. Years passed, and Arthur's life evolved into a new rhythm. He met Sarah, a compassionate woman who embraced him despite his past. They married and built a life together in a cozy house in the countryside. Their home was filled with laughter and love, and soon they had 2 children, Aidan and Lily. Despite this new chapter, Arthur never forgot Nua. Her memory remained a private, cherished part of him. He kept her close in his heart, a reminder of the extraordinary journey they shared. On a clear summer night, as Arthur sat on the porch with his family asleep inside, he looked up at the stars and felt a familiar presence beside him. "Hello, Arthur," Nua's voice echoed softly in his mind. Arthur smiled, feeling a mix of joy and nostalgia. "Hello, Nua. How is Earth?" she asked gently. "It's beautiful," Arthur replied, "and it's been different, but I've found my place here." Nua's presence was soothing, a warm touch in the cold expanse of space. "I'm glad," she said. "I'm glad you found happiness." Arthur gazed at the stars, feeling a profound sense of peace. "Thank you, Nua, for everything." And as he continued to watch the night sky, Arthur knew that no matter how far apart they were, Nua's essence would always be with him. She was a treasured part of his past, a star in his personal constellation, reminding him of a time when the universe felt a little smaller and more connected.